My brother and I are arguing right now about when exactly this happened, but I'm just going to tell it from my perspective, from what I remember. Back when I believe I was 15 years old, my brother and I took law enforcement classes at the East Valley Institute of Technology, called EVIT. And it was a summer class, and we took the bus, the city bus there. And that's why I think I was only 15, because neither of us could drive to EVIT. He thinks that I was 17 when we went, but that's way too late because I drove to school every day when I was 17. So I don't know why we would have taken the bus. Regardless, I remember the exact seat I was on in the bus when I came up with the Hoach. And when we were riding the bus, because we weren't having to pay attention to driving or anything and we had plenty of room, I used to whip out a blue notebook and I would write down, at the time, it was mostly magic cards that I was making up. But I also remember one day on the bus having the idea, the word the Hoach just popped into my mind, and for some reason I immediately thought that the Hoach would be a cavern. And that cavern used to have monsters in it. And that would be a place to adventure. Now, I refined the idea over time. There was an old series of articles in Dragon magazine called Dungeon Craft, and one of the rules of dungeon mastering that appeared in those articles was whenever you create something, also create a secret for it. And it basically helps you add depth to ideas. And my secret for the Hoach, I had just mentioned it used to have monsters in it. The Hoach was supposed to be a cavern, and long ago, within a lifetime, a generation ago, there were a bunch of monsters living in that cavern, and they were threatening the people in the town. And so adventurers went and cleaned out the caverns. They adventured through the Hoach and killed all the goblins or whatever were inside. And then the town was fine. Now, when the PCs are finally coming of age, more monsters suddenly were attacking the town. And so they thought, let's go back to the Hoach. And it turns out that there was another infestation of monsters. And that was like a very shallow secret for it. What I was going to have the players do was, since people, oh, and I have just a whole bunch of real cavern pictures that I've been collecting over the years to make the Hoach. I wanted it to be a more realistic natural cavern than D&D caverns usually are. So since the people had already cleared out the Hoach, there would have been maps of the Hoach. There would have been names of certain aspects in the Hoach. Like here's a good one: Waterfall, El Diablo, Bottomless Pit, Great Fault Room. This is a real cavern. I don't know where it's from. This one, it's just called Cavern Map. But the PCs would be able to get these maps and look at the cavern and work through there. Actually, I don't think this. Yeah, this is for sure. It is a real cavern. I threw me because it said Kingdom of the Elves. And explore. Now, the deeper secret to it was that I was going to have them fall through the floor at one point and discover a part of the Hoach that was not mapped. So a new group would get their bearings and learn the rules by fighting goblins or what have you in the upper levels of the Hoach, where they had a map and they knew where everything was and they could go there. And then suddenly they would be dropped through a weak part of the floor and discover an uncharted section of the Hoach, where then it would be their place to explore. And that was my deeper secret for it. The Hoach is still one of my favorite dungeons. I've added a yet deeper secret to it. But I definitely think that the Hoach is going to be one of the main attractions of the early parts of Trocare in this sandbox game. And there's already a town that was established. It's called Land's Blessing. And it exists near the hills where the Hoach was carved out of limestone long ago by a river. And these people were attacked by creatures from the Hoach, and people, adventurers or part of the garrison at Windhaven, went and cleared out the Hoach. Now, of course, years later, after the rest of the territory outside of Windhaven has become dangerous, the Hoach is once again infested. But, just like last time, there are maps of the Hoach Cave Without a Name from Kendall Company, Texas. And so they get that little bit. That is a pre-existing thing where they can actually have a map, and it makes sense that there's a map of this place lying around. Unlike, I mean, it kind of strikes me when in the original Sandbox game, they find treasure maps that lead them out into the wilderness somewhere. And I always ask myself, where do these treasure maps come from? Well, in this case, the treasure map from the Hoach, it wouldn't really be treasure map, I suppose, comes from the fact that people had already explored the Hoach and killed a bunch of monsters there. So they could head into the Hoach. There'd be plenty of monsters to fight right from the beginning. Nobody would be naive enough to think that the place hadn't been reinfested since the last time they cleared it out. And as they fight against these monsters, they can work their way down further into the Hoach than anybody else had. And part of it could be falling through the floor and discovering new parts of the Hoach or what have you. I also liked, before I had read about the Sandbox game, I always wanted the Hoach to play some sort of central role. And so I had a part where the Hoach in these lower levels would connect with a cave system under the ruins of Trocaire. It would be quite some distance laterally to travel, but you wouldn't notice it as much if you're spelunking full time down there. And so I'd always wanted it to be where the PCs would go to the Hoach, clear out the top levels of it, maybe not find deeper levels, and then leave and then go to the ruins of Trocaire and then go down. The ruins of Trocaire were supposed to be the main attraction. The Hoach was like a side quest. But I wanted to say, hey, you did that side quest earlier. Now you've gone down the ruins of Trocaire. You found these underground caves. And maybe when you travel down one of the cave paths, you end up coming out in the Hoach. And you're like, wow, how did that happen? But it would be an alternate part of the dungeon, an alternate entrance slash exit that could get you between Trocaire and the Hoach. Later on, again, ruthlessly stealing good ideas, in the Book of Vile Darkness, there is a group of goblins known as the Goblins of Rock. And they had these pits filled with this mutagenic substance. And so they would dip goblins into these pits of goo, and when they came out, they would start to mutate, and they would get bigger and stronger and uglier, sometimes developing weird powers. And it was a way to have the... I incorporated that into the Hoach because there would be goblins in the Hoach. And then, later on, because of these goblin pits, you could go back into the Hoach, go deeper, and you could still fight the same goblin tribe that might have been living there. But because of the mutations that happen from these pits, you could have the higher level goblins, stronger goblins, more difficult to defeat goblins. So it let that same tribe of goblins ramp up in power along with the PCs until you finally got down there, discovered who Rock was, and defeat him and put his goblin menace out of the way. The PCs would think they had cleaned out, I love this Kickapoo cavern, they thought they had cleaned out the goblins, and then they come back even stronger later because of these goblin pits. So now I'm working on the Hoach, specifically kind of the history of it, and a little bit of the layout of Lands Blessing, the town itself, since the PCs are going to end up there. One of the cool things from the original Sandbox game was the guy had this idea for establishing a map. Since he was not going to make a map and give it to the players had to keep their own map. And since this map was supposed to be collaborative, that is, all the PCs would have to contribute to the map as they explored the different regions. He came up with the idea of there being a wooden table in the inn or the bar in the safe town. And they, sometime long ago, a group of adventurers had carved part of a map into that table. And so they had basically the start of a map. And it was real crude, and it wasn't cartography or anything like that. It was just marking an X and maybe writing down, giant pointy rock. There'd be like a giant spire or something in the middle of the wilderness to use as a landmark. And then the PCs could just continue to add to that map. I like that idea. Everybody who reads the Sandbox game write-up and decides to run their own loves that idea. But I decided instead of having it back in Windhaven, this table with the Hoach map on it could be found in Lands Blessing. The town is gone. It's been abandoned. All the people were killed. Most of it was burned down, but this table survives. And in poking through the wreckage, they would discover this map carved into the wood. And then sort of, help the players figure out maybe next time you head back to Windhaven, you start your own map. You can do it that same way, and that would be kind of cool. So let's just ramp through these real quick and get to this. You see all of these maps and how real cave systems look. And then this is how D&D cave systems look. Really simplistic, really easy, but when you actually play the game, it works. And I put these in this folder specifically to say, hey, you don't need to be as complex as a real cave is when you start drawing out the Hoach. Draw it functionally from the point of view of a D&D game map. And this is just a reminder to myself that this is the kind of stuff that you need. You certainly don't need to go and have these massive, twisty maps. All right, so that's it for now. Bye-bye.